and welcome everybody to another episode of Transform Your Practice, Transform Your Life. My name is Kristina Schneider, and I'm a practice success coach here at a company called The Ultimate Estate Planner. And if you haven't subscribed already to our podcast to be notified of new episodes, I highly recommend that you do so right now. And also, if you have enjoyed our episode or have gotten any kind of value out of our podcast, if you would do me a huge favor and if you would leave us a review or comment with a review, depending on where you're listening to this podcast. It's how people organically are going to find our podcast. The algorithm is algorithming. And so I would greatly appreciate it. And if you can also, if there's ever an episode that you find really helpful or valuable, if you could share that like on your LinkedIn or anywhere else that would be appropriate with your fellow colleagues, I would certainly appreciate it. So thanks so much for tuning into today's episode. I'm excited about today's episode because I think it's extremely timely. This is constantly coming up in my coaching sessions and in our 2-day event. And today's episode is entitled The Pros and Cons of Allowing Workers to Become Hybrid and or Fully Remote. And so again, a highly popularized topics, certainly after the pandemic. And of course, this year, a lot of companies, redacting their hybrid and or remote policies. And there's that whole return to office push that's been happening. And so a lot of people have been coming up to us asking me what my thoughts are. And so what I will say is, I think that there are definitely a lot of pros to being in person in office. I think that especially with a small law firm like most estate planning firms I would say the ability to interact face to face, the ability to create truly an office culture there and relationships, I think I think that's what's been lacking for a lot of companies, even larger ones that have tried to go fully remote after having been an in-person office. I think the nature of what we do in estate planning is far better face to face. For example, I can just tell you the number of attorneys that have tried to do virtual practices. Some have been very successful to the level of success that they need, but to scale it, to grow it, they've had to do some form of hybrid and go back to in person. I know just as a recent podcast with Kevin Von Tungelm and even in Phil Cavish's practice, in-person seminars are far more effective than online seminars and webinars. And so again, I think a lot of those kind of pros and cons to the face-to-face client interaction also are true for employees. But let me talk to you a little bit about first of all, I would say, let's talk about the pros, right? We can certainly get into the cons as well, but let's talk a little bit about the pros. First of all, I do think that there is definitely a talent attraction and retention benefit to offering or having the ability for people to go hybrid or remote at some point. I think that there are a lot of candidates out there that are requiring and or needing people to be a lot more flexible with their personal lives and personal schedules. Frankly, the millennials and Gen Zers are expecting some level of flexibility. They are trying to have families in today's day and age, and manage that and be present fathers and mothers. And so they are certainly looking for firms that allow for some level of flexibility for that. Cost savings, of course, if you don't need to have a dedicated office space and workstation in your office to accommodate somebody, there's going to certainly be a smaller need, a need for a smaller office space, or maybe you don't need to expand it. And so lower rent, lower utilities, less supplies, things like that, right? I would say that depending on your firm's systems and processes, and then the kind of worker that you have, there certainly can be absolutely increased employee productivity, especially, with certain roles. And I'll talk to you about which roles I think make for fantastic hybrid and or remote workers. But there's definitely a higher level of satisfaction for sure, especially if you have workers that might commute very long distances into your office. Again, also ties to your talent attraction and retention pool, right? And depending on their level of work, right, you certainly will see, certain roles that require uninterrupted time and focus. And that can certainly be done perhaps better at home than at the office. It depends on the nature of home. If home is, a bunch of toddlers and cats running around, maybe not. Maybe it's less, maybe it's more distracting, right? I would say that there is potential for expanded service hours. So if you have different staff in different time zones that can answer your phones, it's also an ability for you to perhaps be able to offer extended phone, coverage and things like that. That's another, potential benefit there. And then I would say, there's some business continuity pros as well. Having remote systems is better. Everything is now backed up. And I know we at Ultimate Estate Planner went hybrid in 2024, and it forced us to move to SharePoint after a lot of attorneys recommended SharePoint. And that was nice because then when we do travel for our 2-day event and our on-site locations, we have access immediately into our network and server, and we don't have to have our IT person come in person and back up a hard drive server that we used to have and everything else. And so we felt definitely like we had moved into a new century of technology. Let me now talk a little bit about some of the cons of allowing hybrid or remote work, some of that you probably are familiar with. First, as I mentioned before, I don't care what you say. I will argue until I'm dead in my grave that there is definitely a risk to firm culture. It is really challenging to create firm culture with people who are zooming in, or communicating only by email, and I've never met them face to face. It is not the same as seeing somebody face to face, getting to really know them, have those conversations, and really build that community. I mean, if you think about the amount of time, how much time people spend at the office and with their coworkers, it's I spend more time with my coworkers than I do my friends and family. So the ability to create a culture around and a community around the workplace is really important. And that is sometimes lost with hybrid and or remote work, especially with fully remote people, much more difficult, right? Hybrid, at least there is some level of face-to-face. Definitely some communication challenges, right? Now people are going to be starting to do chat, do emails. Maybe you're getting email flooded. You have to have additional Zoom meetings, things like that. Communication can be much more difficult. It's harder to read body language when there's not a lot of communication happening. And if you've never met those people, it becomes even much more difficult, right? Because one thing I will say is that in Phil's law practice, his senior paralegal has been remote long before COVID. Probably no, not 20 years. I would say at least 15 years before COVID. She was definitely remote, but she also had worked at the firm for like 10 or 15 years prior to that. So we already knew her. We already trusted her. We already had trust and rapport with her. We already were familiar with her. It was very different than, having somebody fully remote that we never interface with, don't really understand or know, and trying to integrate them in. Training and onboarding, again, I think can be somewhat challenging. It creates some new challenges with being remote. Obviously, confidentiality excuse me, confidentiality and cybersecurity can certainly be an added risk now. That was a big reason why I know Phil's firm for a long time really didn't like this idea of being remote and taking work offsite and having people to, log in from their home internet and things like that. And then, of course, productivity monitoring. There's absolutely just no way for the law firm to know 100% that people are at home working when they're supposed to be working and that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. There's just really no way. And you can put systems in place like keyboard stroke recording and screen monitoring, but that becomes kind of overly invasive and very micromanagey, and it creates just this environment and culture around, we don't trust you, but we're going to let you work from home, and it doesn't feel good, right? And so some practical considerations for estate planning law firms to consider before deciding to go hybrid and remote. First of all, from definitely a higher level standpoint, is figuring out, is that the kind of culture that you, the attorney business owner, want? Is that something that you're open to, that you're okay working with? You have to decide that it's your business. That's why you've created your own business, right? But the other thing is that I do think that there are certain roles that are more suited for hybrid or remote. Paralegals, absolutely number one position that I absolutely think could be fully remote. I know because that's been the case even in Phil's firm, again, pre-pandemic. And so I would say what happens when they are taken out of the practice to be remote, they're not interrupted by the phone, all the staff interaction, all the, miscellaneous tasks. They actually get to focus on their paralegal work. And so I definitely think that paralegals, fully remote or hybrid, absolutely a fantastic role for that. I would say for every other position, in my opinion, it becomes very challenging. Administrative staff, certainly even attorneys, I recommend in-person meetings, in-person seminars. And then of course, receptionists, I recommend having those people be on site. If you have to split up a position to say, well, you'll do all your non-in-person, you don't have to scan and copy, we'll get that covered somewhere else, then you basically have accommodated somebody to be remote and then dropped their in-person tasks probably on maybe an overpaid and overqualified person like a paralegal or an attorney to do because they don't have anyone else that can pick up the slack to do it. I think office managers, if you have anybody that's in any kind of office manager or director of operations type of role that also is intended to be HR, I absolutely think that person needs to be in office in person at least 30, ideally 40 hours a week. I just do. I think that that's a role where it's one of those you need to be on deck and know what's happening in the firm in order to ensure that it's operating right? You can't do that remotely. You don't know, you can't be remote and then know that people are coming in on time, right? And then this becomes a little bit, when the cat's away, the mice will play type of situation. So I think understanding what roles that are best suited for that is certainly important. Obviously, you need to understand what technology needs that you're going to have. Do you need something like cloud-based software? A lot of people already have that, like Clio and Wealth Docs. And SharePoint is fantastic. So I got that recommendation from a wealth counsel attorney to get SharePoint. That's been an absolutely fantastic investment for our company. I wish we had done that sooner. And then the other thing I would say that you really need to have in place is what policies do you have to have? Again, you may need very clear remote work agreements. It may be tied to tenure. It may be tied to what type of position you're in. Because once you give it to one person, you get into this HR labor law issue where, do you have to offer it to everybody? Possibly, but maybe only certain roles are given them. That's made very clear, maybe after a certain period of time that they've worked for you. That may be available, but you can't give it to one person and one person alone, and it creates a form of nepotism and resentment, with management, with that person by others, where maybe some people are given those accommodations and other people are not, and people are asking for it. So you have to have just very clear communication of that, and obviously security around how client information, client documents are being stored and transported if that's an issue too, so that those things are kept safe and confidential. So anyway, that's a long-winded answer to tell you all the pros and cons and what needs to happen in order to become fully remote and or hybrid. I will say most of the firms that I've seen that are thriving, almost 90 to 95%, if not 100% of their workforce are in person. And those that are struggling with some issues have some level of, they're trying to offer hybrid and they're trying to make it available for people, and then they're struggling to retain those people long term. And I've seen some firms do absolutely fantastic where they've had working moms that really need the accommodation, and those people are motivated to continue to stay remote and or hybrid. And if the person can be located somewhat nearby, if you can even do it where they're like 99% remote and 1%, you get them into the office even once or twice a month or something for a meeting and just to have some FaceTime, that's great. I recommend having some level of FaceTime at some point, even if I know that we've brought Elaine from our senior paralegal from Florida at points in time back to California to meet face to face. So So that's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you found it valuable or useful. If you would like to have a one-on-one conversation about hybrid versus remote versus in-person workers, feel free to go to our website at ultimateestateplanner.com and schedule a free 30-minute strategy session with me. And I hope I will be speaking with you soon. And I look forward to continuing to help you unlock your practice's potential. Goodbye, everybody.